The great chamber of the Galactic Concordance was a space defined by silence, a vessel carved from the heart of a moonlet, designed to contain the echoes of history. Light, ancient and weary, filtered through crystalline walls that displayed the slow, majestic pirouette of the cosmos outside. Here, gravity was a courtesy, not a law, and the assembled emissaries floated in their designated spheres of influence, their forms as varied as the star systems they represented. High Emissary Kalen of the Xylos, his silicon-based body a latticework of patient geology and deliberate thought, felt the silence as a physical weight. It was the silence of fear, a vacuum where diplomacy and reason had begun to fail. At the center of the chamber, a swirling nebula of holographic light depicted the contested sector, a rash of crimson bleeding into the serene blues of established concordance territory. The crimson was humanity. For cycles, they had been a curiosity, a whisper from the galactic fringe. A bipedal, soft-bodied species from a volatile water world, their technology was perceived as brutally simplistic: kinetic force, controlled fusion, solid matter projectiles. They were loud in the electromagnetic spectrum, but quiet in the psionic and gravitational channels that sophisticated races used for true communication. They were, by all accounts of the established powers, a fleeting anomaly. An aggressive, short-lived species that would burn itself out, contained by its own primitive grasp of the universe. Yet the crimson on the map grew, not with the explosive violence of a warrior race like the Cathar, but with the steady, inexorable crawl of a glacier. They did not conquer. They assimilated empty systems, built their stark, functional habitats, and then fell silent again. This silence was more unnerving than any war cry. They advance without declaration, without creed, General Vorlag of the Cathar rumbled, his armored carapace flexing with contained aggression. His species saw the universe as a series of honorable conflicts, and humanity's refusal to engage in this grand, violent dance was an insult to their very nature. They claim star systems with the cold arrogance of a tide claiming a shoreline. They do not ask. They do not negotiate. They simply are. This is an act of war, undeclared but undeniable. From a shimmering cloud of sentient gas, the Lumina Collective whispered, its voice a chorus of harmonious chimes that translated directly into the minds of all present. The patterns are incomplete. Their trajectory is logical, yet their intent is a void. We perceive great potential energy, but no kinetic release. They build, but they do not threaten. They expand, but they do not conquer. They are a paradox that reason cannot yet solve. Kalen shifted his crystalline form, the faint grinding of his joints the only sound in his sphere. Reason, he projected, his thoughts resonating with the calm, deep tone of ancient stone, is predicated on shared axioms. We assume their motivations mirror our own in some fundamental way: survival, expansion, dominance, enlightenment. What if their axioms are entirely other? What if we are trying to solve an equation with the wrong mathematical language? He gestured with a multifaceted limb toward the crimson stain. We have sent envoys. They were met with polite but firm refusal. They were offered observer status in the concordance. They declined. They were warned of the Ethel. They offered no response. The name fell into the chamber like a shard of ice. The Ethel. They were not members of the concordance. They were not a species one negotiated with. They were a power that had existed long before the concordance was a hopeful dream, a race of beings whose technology was indistinguishable from the laws of physics themselves. They did not travel through space. They persuaded space to bring them to their destination. Their ships were not built, but grown from concepts, elegant vessels of light and warped spacetime that could unmake a star system with a thought. They considered themselves the custodians of the galaxy, and their mandate was divine, absolute, and terrifyingly enforced. Any race that grew too ambitious, too loud, too disruptive would be met by a purifier fleet and pruned from the garden of existence. Humanity, in its silent, stubborn expansion, was moving dangerously close to Ethel territory. The Ethel will not tolerate this, the Vespidian ambassador hissed, his chitinous mandibles clicking with anxiety. His people were traders, their entire culture built on the delicate web of treaties and economic agreements that the Ethel's stability, however tyrannical, allowed. The humans are a stone thrown into a placid pond. The ripples will reach the Ethel's shores, and they will not ask who threw the stone. They will simply boil the pond. Then we must warn them again with more force, Vorlag insisted. Deliver an ultimatum, withdraw or face the comb. In Ed Might of the Concordance, better they face our honorable fleets than the silent oblivion the Ethel will deliver. An ultimatum to a species that does not speak our language of power is a meaningless gesture, Kalen countered. We would be threatening a storm front with a spear. They have given us no cause for war, General. They have not attacked our worlds. They have not broken our treaties. They have only occupied that which was empty. To attack them would be to become the aggressors. It would violate the very foundation of this concordance. The lumina pulsed with a soft, melancholic light. The patterns shift. A new variable has entered the field, a single human vessel. It moves from their core territory on a direct course for the ethel dominion. A wave of disbelief washed through the chamber. Even the aggressive Vorlag was momentarily stunned into silence. This was not merely foolish. This was a form of ritual suicide. A single ship of any race venturing into the Dominion was an act of supreme arrogance that would be met with an immediate and final response. The ethel did not tolerate trespassers. "What is its class, its power signature?" the Vespidian demanded, his voice strained. "It is quiet," the Lumina whispered. "Almost undetectable. Its energy output is negligible, far below that of a standard patrol craft. Its design is a simple geometric absolute, a long, gray spear of a thing. They call it the Vigilance Asterisk." Kalen felt a tremor run through his very being, a resonance of deep, primal dread that had nothing to do with logic. The silence of the humans had been unnerving. The movement of a single, quiet ship into the heart of their greatest fear was something else entirely. It was the calm, deliberate step of a creature that either did not understand the concept of a predator, or knew with absolute certainty that it was not the prey. He watched the holographic map, where a tiny, almost invisible speck of light now moved with serene, unwavering purpose toward the shimmering, sanctified borders of the ethel. The crimson stain of their territory suddenly seemed less like a creeping tide, and more like a deliberate foundation being laid for something vast and incomprehensible. The silence in the great chamber was broken by a new, shared understanding. They were not watching a potential war. They were watching the prologue to an apocalypse. And they had no idea whose it would be. The sensor readings were a quiet heresy. Across the concordance in fleet command centers and deep space observatories, 1,000 different species stared at their monitors in a state of suspended disbelief. The ethel had responded. It was not a single ship or a small patrol, but a full purification fleet. The term was a sterile euphemism for what was, in effect, an act of cosmic erasure. The ethel vessels appeared not by tearing a hole in spacetime with the vulgar energies of a hyperspace jump, but by simply arriving asterisk. One moment there was empty space. The next, a constellation of impossible beauty and terror hung against the void. They were vessels of pure concept, beings of woven light and solidified geometry that defied conventional understanding. They shimmered with an internal luminescence, their forms fluid, almost organic, like great celestial rays gliding through an unseen ocean. They did not hum with the sound of engines. They resonated with a deep, subsonic harmony that could be felt in the bones of any being with a physical form, a song of absolute power that promised either transcendence or annihilation. This was the might that had maintained the galactic order for millennia, the power that had humbled empires and turned suns to cold cinders. And it was all being brought to bear against a single, silent, gray spear of metal. The human ship, the Vigilance Asterisk, did not react. It did not accelerate, it did not deviate, it did not power its weapon systems. It continued on its trajectory as if the celestial host before it was nothing more than a trick of the light. Kalen watched from the command nexus of his own flagship, the Asterisk Stone's memory Asterisk, which was stationed at a safe, observational distance. He had ordered his entire diplomatic fleet to witness this. History was being made, and he felt a profound, chilling certainty that it needed to be recorded, no matter how brief and brutal that history might be. "They are hailing the human vessel," his communications officer reported, his voice a low, reverent murmur. The ethel did not use radio waves. Their communication was a direct imposition of will, a psionic broadcast that washed over a system like a tidal wave. Even on the Asterisk Stone's memory Asterisk, far from the epicenter, the crew felt it, a crushing sense of insignificance, a feeling of being judged by an ancient and unforgiving god. The message, when translated by the ship's psychic dampeners, was simple and utterly devoid of negotiation. "You are a discordant note in the grand symphony. You will cease. Your existence, your composition is at an end." There was no offer of surrender. There was no demand for an explanation. It was a statement of fact, a final, irrevocable judgment. The concordance held its collective breath, waiting for the inevitable. They waited for the human ship to be unmade, for its atoms to be scattered, for its very existence to be edited out of the fabric of spacetime. And then the impossible happened. A reply. Not a psionic wave, not a beam of light, but a simple, almost insultingly primitive burst of encoded radio waves. It was broadcast on all open channels, translated by concordance systems into thousands of languages simultaneously. The text appeared on Kalen's main view screen, stark and black against the swirling cosmos. We do not recognize your authority to compose or conclude. We are present. We will remain present. Any attempt to alter our state will be met with a commensurate response. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of the message sent a shockwave through the Concordance fleet. Vorlag's growl of disbelief was audible over the command channel. The Vespidian ambassador was making frantic, clicking noises of pure panic. Humanity was not just defying the Ethel. They were denying their very nature. They were treating a god like a belligerent neighbor. The Ethel did not deign to reply. The symphony of their fleet swelled, the harmony shifting to a deep, menacing chord that warped the light around them. Space itself seemed to curve and twist in deference to their power. A lance of pure, focused non-reality, a weapon that did not destroy matter but simply erased its right to exist, shot forth from the lead Ethel vessel. It was a silent, beautiful, and utterly final attack. Kalen braced himself for the end of the Vigilance asterisk, but the end did not come. The lance of uncreation, a force that could extinguish a star, traveled toward the human ship. And then it vanished. It did not impact. It did not detonate. It simply ceased to be a few hundred kilometers from the Vigilance's bow. There was no shield flare, no energy discharge, no ripple in spacetime. The attack was just gone, as if the universe itself had suddenly forgotten the command that had been issued. Silence. A profound, deep, and terrifying silence descended upon the void. The Ethel fleet hung there, their divine light seeming to flicker for a moment, a subtle dimming of their celestial glow. They had passed judgment, and reality had refused to carry out the sentence. They attacked again. This time the entire fleet acted in concert. They did not fire a single beam, but attempted to warp the very fabric of the space the Vigilance occupied. They tried to fold it, to twist it into a knot of paradoxical geometry, to cast it into a pocket dimension of pure chaos. From Kalen's perspective, it was a horrifying spectacle. The stars around the human ship began to distort, to streak and bend as if viewed through a flawed lens. The very laws of physics were being rewritten, and at the center of it all the Vigilance remained. It was a point of absolute stability in a sea of cosmic madness. The space it occupied refused to bend. The laws of physics within its immediate vicinity held firm, an anchor of cold, immutable reality against a tide of divine power. The gray spear of a ship was not fighting back. It was simply, stubbornly, existing, and its existence was a denial of everything the Ethel were. Then the true horror began. The Ethel ships, their forms sustained by their constant, effortless manipulation of reality, began to fail. The light that composed their hulls wavered, stuttered. The elegant, impossible curves of their structures began to sag, to resolve into cruder, less perfect shapes. The divine symphony they projected faltered, replaced by a grating, discordant shriek of psionic agony and confusion. They were gods who had just discovered the concept of atheism, and it was tearing them apart. Their power, their very being, was predicated on the universe obeying their will. The Vigilance was creating a field around itself where the universe was deaf. A single Ethel cruiser, its form flickering violently, suddenly convulsed. Its internal energies, no longer contained by a perfectly sculpted reality, collapsed inward. For a brief, silent moment, it became a miniature black hole before erupting in a flash of hard radiation and mundane physical shrapnel. The god ship died a mortal death, a death of pressure and heat and physics, the kind of death a primitive human vessel might suffer. The rest of the Ethel fleet recoiled. The perfect, confident formation broke. They were not just retreating, they were fleeing in a state of absolute existential terror. The song of power had become a scream of fear. They were not afraid of being destroyed. They were afraid of being diminished. They were afraid of being made real. Across the Concordance, a new understanding dawned, cold and sharp as a shard of glass. As they had all been wrong. They had looked at humanity's technology and seen it as primitive. They had mistaken its simplicity for a lack of sophistication. They had failed to comprehend the philosophy that drove it. Humanity did not seek to bend the universe to its will. They did not seek to rewrite the laws of physics. They sought to understand them, to master them, and to enforce them. The Vigilance was not a warship. It was a statement of dogma. It was a temple to causality, and its one terrible weapon was a field that imposed its belief on the space around it. It did not kill gods. It reminded them that they were made of the same mortal dust as everything else. And to a god, that was a fate far worse than death. The crimson on the map was not the color of blood. It was the color of a foundation, and humanity had just laid the first unshakable stone. The chamber of the Galactic Concordance was silent once more, but this was a different silence. The previous quiet had been born of fear of the known, of the predictable tyranny of the Ethel. This new silence was one of profound, system-shattering awe. The holographic map at the chamber's center still glowed, but the context had been irrevocably altered. The crimson territory of humanity no longer looked like an aggressive incursion. Looked like a bastion of sanity in a galaxy they had just discovered was ruled by mad gods. The ethel, the unshakable constant in the galactic equation for eons, were now a variable, their power shown to be conditional, their divinity a fragile illusion. Kalen felt the foundations of his own worldview cracking. His people, the Xylos, revered logic and the predictable flow of causality. They had always viewed the ethel's abilities as a form of higher-order physics they simply did not yet understand. Now he saw the truth. The ethel were not masters of a higher science. They were cheaters, a species that had found a way to ignore the rules of the game everyone else was forced to play. And humanity, the quiet, unassuming newcomers, had arrived and simply turned the rulebook into a cage. A soft chime announced an incoming transmission. It was not from a concordance world, nor was it the panicked psionic shriek of a retreating ethel. It was a human signal, broadcast with the same calm, deliberate clarity as their previous message. They were requesting permission to address the concordance. Permission was granted with a speed that bordered on undignified. Every emissary, from the now humbled General Vorlag to the trembling Vespidian, needed to understand. A holographic image coalesced in the center of the chamber. It was not a grand, imposing figure. It was a single human female, her form unadorned by armor or robes of state. She wore a simple, dark blue uniform. Her face was pale, her features symmetrical, her expression one of solemn neutrality. There was no triumph in her eyes, no arrogance in her posture. She stood with a quiet stillness that Kalen found more commanding than any of Vorlag's boisterous displays. "I am Ambassador Eva Rostova of the Terran Confederacy," she said. Her voice was calm, the translated words clear and measured. "I speak on behalf of the people of Earth and her colonies. We thank you for granting this audience." Kalen found his own voice projecting his thoughts toward her. "Ambassador, you have rearranged the political landscape of this galaxy in a single cycle. You have done what the combined might of 1,000 species has never dared to contemplate. You have humbled the ethel." "That was not our intention," Rostova replied, her gaze unwavering. To humble was not the goal. To establish a baseline reality was. The phrase hung in the air, dense with meaning. A baseline reality. It was such a simple yet profoundly revolutionary concept. "Explain your meaning," Vorlag rumbled, his usual aggression tempered with a new, grudging respect. "Your vessel, that field, what is it?" "The asterisk vigilance is not a weapon, General. It is a regulator," Rostova explained. "It generates what we call a causality enforcement field. Within the field's area of effect, the fundamental laws of the universe, thermodynamics, causality, the conservation of energy, the constant speed of light, are not merely dominant. They are absolute. Higher dimensional manipulation, reality warping, psionic imposition of will, these things are rendered impossible, as they are violations of that baseline." "You turn their greatest strength into a fatal weakness," Kalen observed, the pieces falling into place within his crystalline mind. "Their ships, their very bodies, are sustained by a constant violation of those laws. By enforcing the rules, you unmade them. We believe that a shared universe requires shared rules," Rostova stated, as if reciting a fundamental truth. "A species that can arbitrarily rewrite the laws of physics for its own benefit is not a peer. It is a systemic threat to the integrity of exist. NCE itself, we could not in good conscience allow such a variable to go unchecked, especially as our own sphere of influence expanded to meet theirs." The Lumina Collective swirled, its voice a soft, inquisitive chime. "Your silence, your refusal of our invitations, your steady, quiet expansion, it was all in preparation for this moment." "It was," the ambassador confirmed. "We are a young species by galactic standards. We knew we were entering a community with powers far older and more established than our own. We observed. We learned. We saw the concordance, a body of peers who, for the most part, operated within a shared physical reality. And we saw the ethel, an entity that operated outside of it. We could not engage in diplomacy until we could ensure that diplomacy would take place on a level playing field. We could not risk joining a community where the foundational principles of our science, our philosophy, our very existence, could be summarily dismissed by a more powerful will. The vigilance is our guarantee of that level field. It is our diplomatic envoy. It ensures that all conversations begin from a place of shared, inarguable truth." Kalen felt a profound sense of shame and an even more profound sense of admiration. While the concordance had cowered, negotiated, and compromised, humanity had been patiently, silently building the ultimate argument for reason. They had not built a bigger weapon. They had built a more fundamental truth. Their technology was not primitive, it was philosophically absolute. "And what now?" the Vespidian ambassador asked, his voice shaking. The Ethel are broken, their myth shattered. There will be chaos, power vacuums, old resentments will flare, their dominion will crumble. That is not our desire, Rostova said, a flicker of something, perhaps concern, crossing her face for the first time. Our goal was not to destroy the Ethel, but to bring them to the negotiating table as equals, to force them to exist within the same reality as the rest of us. We believe that stability is preferable to chaos, but stability cannot be built on a foundation of tyranny and fear. She looked directly at Kalen, her gaze piercing. Humanity does not seek to rule. We seek partners. We seek a galaxy where progress is governed by discovery and cooperation, not by the whims of those who can bend reality to their will. We wish to formally apply for membership in the Galactic Concordance, to share our knowledge and to work with you to build a more stable future, one based on mutual respect and a shared understanding of the universe we all inhabit. The offer was stunning. After all their posturing, their fear, their underestimation, humanity was not coming as a conqueror, but as an ally. They had faced down a god not for power, but for principle. They had brought the most powerful force in the galaxy to its knees, and their first act was to ask for a seat at the council table as an equal. Kalen looked around the chamber at the other emissaries. He saw Vorlag's rigid, honorable posture soften. He saw the Vespidian's anxious clicking cease. He saw the Lumina's light pulse with a steady, warm glow of acceptance. Humanity was not the storm they had feared. They were the calm, immovable object that had broken the storm. They were the anchor in a chaotic sea. Ambassador Rostova, Kalen began, his voice resonating with the weight of a decision that would reshape the future of every species present. On behalf of the Galactic Concordance, I believe your application will be most welcome. Before he could continue, a frantic alert cut through the chamber's calm. It was a priority signal overriding all diplomatic protocols. It was coming from the direction of the shattered Ethel fleet, but it was not a threat. It was a plea. The Ethel had never communicated with the Concordance as equals. Their messages were always commands, pronouncements from on high, but this was different. It was a raw, unfiltered stream of psionic terror and desperation. It was not aimed at the Concordance. It was aimed directly, specifically at the Vigilance asterisk. On the main screen beside Ambassador Rostova's calm image, a new window opened. It was a torrent of Ethel data, a chaotic flood of images, concepts, and linguistic fragments that Concordance systems struggled to parse. It was not a message. It was a confession, a warning, an explanation that was 1,000 times more terrifying than their silence had ever been. The data stream showed their history, a history that stretched back into the mythic past. It showed them not as conquerors, but as refugees. It showed them discovering their reality-bending abilities not as a means of power, but as a desperate tool for survival. It showed them fleeing from something. And then it showed what they were fleeing from. The images were abstract, conceptual, yet they conveyed a horror that bypassed reason and struck directly at the core of conscious thought. Force they called the static, the great unraveling. It was not a fleet. It was not an empire. It was a form of anti-existence. A presence from beyond the galactic rim that did not consume matter or energy in any conventional sense. It consumed information. It fed on complexity, on consciousness, on the very patterns that defined life and order. Where it passed, it left behind not destruction, but a terrifying, seamless simplicity. A universe scrubbed clean of thought, of life, of history, of causality itself. A perfect, silent, undifferentiated void. The data stream showed entire galaxies falling to the static, their light and life not extinguished, but simply erased from the cosmic record. The Ethel were the sole survivors of their own cosmic neighborhood, having escaped only because their ability to warp reality allowed them to create a bubble of existence that the static could not easily parse. Their entire empire, their divine mandate, their tyrannical control of the galaxy, it was all a lie. A necessary, terrible lie. They were not gods, they were zookeepers, they were wardens. Their reality warping was not a weapon of conquest, but the bars of a cage. They had been containing the other species of the galaxy, pruning any that grew too advanced or too loud, not out of malice, but to keep them from attracting the attention of the hunter outside. Their dominion was a shield, a vast, complex illusion of manipulated spacetime designed to hide the vibrant, noisy life within this galaxy from the silent, hungry emptiness that lay beyond. And the Vigilance asterisk, in its righteous, logical quest to impose a single, baseline reality, had just shattered that shield. The last fragment of the Ethel message was a single, terrifying concept, a plea from a fallen god to the mortals who had struck them down. The silence is broken. You have shown it the way in. The song is over. Now there is only the static. Ambassador Rostova's face was a mask of pale, dawning horror. Her people, in their noble pursuit of universal truth, had just invalidated the one lie that was keeping the entire galaxy alive. Kaelin looked from her face to the holographic star map. The shimmering borders of the Ethel Dominion were flickering and dying, and at the far, cold edge of the galaxy, a new sensor reading was appearing on the long-range arrays. It was not energy, it was not matter. It was a slow, creeping patch of absolute nothing, a hole in the universe that was beginning to grow. The warship so advanced that even the gods feared it had done its job. It had made the gods mortal, and in doing so it had just rung the dinner bell for the devourer of worlds. A new fear, cold and absolute, settled in the great chamber. The fear of gods was gone. It had been replaced by the fear of a universe that was about to be unwritten. And the only ones left to face it were the humbled, the broken, and the profoundly, terrifyingly logical humans who had doomed them all. The gravity of the Ethel's revelation pressed down on the concordance chamber, heavier than any star. The silence that returned was one of stark, abject terror. The greatest threat they had ever known was not a tyrant, but a shield. The peace they had chafed under was not oppression, but quarantine. Every battle fought, every treaty signed, every life lived under the shadow of the Ethel had been part of a grand, desperate deception to keep a far greater horror at bay. Ambassador Rostova stood frozen for a long moment, her face etched with the weight of a burden no single being should have to bear. The human quest for objective reality, for a universe governed by unbreakable laws, had been a noble endeavor. But the universe, it seemed, did not always reward nobility. Sometimes a beautiful lie was the only thing standing between existence and oblivion. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was devoid of its earlier calm authority. It was quiet, strained, the voice of a philosopher who had just seen the abyss at the end of all logic. "The data, we are verifying its authenticity," she said, her words directed at no one in particular. "But its complexity, the layers of historical and physical data, it is consistent with a civilization as old as the Ethel. It feels." "True, truth is a cold comfort when it is the herald of annihilation," Kaelin projected, his own crystalline mind struggling to process the scale of the threat. The static. The name itself felt like a violation, a word for the cessation of all things. "Your ship, the Vigilance Asterisk, its field, can it stop this static?" Rostova shook her head slowly. "The causality enforcement field works by reinforcing the known laws of physics. The Ethel data suggests the static is not a physical phenomenon. It does not operate within our reality. It operates on it. It's a cancer of information, a null state that consumes patterns. Our field would be like using a shield to stop an idea. The vigilance can anchor reality, but it cannot create where it has been erased." Her expression hardened, the philosopher giving way to the strategist. "But it may give us one advantage. The Ethel data stream is unstable, prone to corruption, which is characteristic of information exposed to the static's influence. The vigilance is the only place in the galaxy where that data can be studied in a perfectly stable, uncorrupted state. It is our only hope of understanding the enemy." General Vorlag, who had built his life around the concept of a definable, honorable foe, slammed a mailed fist against his console. "Understand it. We must fight it. We will meet this emptiness with fire and steel. The combined fleets of the Concordance will. His voice trailed off, the futility of his own words crashing down on him. "How do you shoot at nothing? How do you declare war on an absence?" "Your rage is understandable, General," Rostova said, her composure slowly returning, forged anew in the fires of this new crisis. "But it is misplaced. We cannot fight the static with weapons designed to destroy matter. We must fight it with what it consumes: information, complexity, life, order." The lumina pulsed, their light now a somber, deep indigo. "The Ethel maintained their shield through a constant, complex manipulation of spacetime, a symphony of lies, as the humans said. They held back the void by being unpredictable, by creating a reality too complex and unstable for the static to easily parse and consume. In our quest for order, we have made the galaxy simple. We have made it digestible." A chilling silence followed that pronouncement. The irony was cosmic in its cruelty. The Concordance, with its laws and treaties, and humanity, with its devotion to causality and reason, had worked to create a stable, predictable galaxy. They had been trying to build a paradise of order, unknowingly setting the table for a predator that fed on simplicity. Kaelin looked at the holographic image of Eva Rostova. He saw not a human, but a kindred spirit, a being devoted to logic, now confronted with a problem that transcended it. In that moment, he felt the last vestiges of fear and suspicion toward her species evaporate, replaced by a sense of shared, desperate purpose. "The Ethel are still out there," Kaelin said, his thoughts directed to the entire chamber. "Their fleet is broken, their divinity is gone, but they are not destroyed. They are now mortals like us. They possess more knowledge of this threat than anyone. We must help them." It was a statement that would have been unthinkable a mere cycle ago. helping the Ethel, their ancient oppressors, their gods, but the context of the universe had been rewritten. The Ethel were no longer gods, but fallen angels, the weary guardians of a gate they could no longer hold closed. "We are already attempting to establish a stable communication channel," Rostova confirmed. "We are offering sanctuary and assistance to all surviving Ethel vessels. We have made it clear that we are no longer adversaries. In the face of this, there can be no adversaries. There is only survival." She then turned her full attention to Kalen, her eyes locking onto his holographic form. "Emissary, humanity is new to this galaxy. We are powerful in our own way, but we are few. We know little of your peoples, your histories, your strengths. We brought this doom to your door. We will not abandon you to face it, but we cannot lead you. The Concordance has stood for centuries. Now it must stand for something more." The future of the galaxy was being decided in that chamber, not with threats and ultimatums, but with the quiet, terrifying weight of necessity. The old paradigm was dead. The age of the Ethel was over. A new age was dawning, an age defined not by power, but by a shared, existential dread. Kalen's gaze swept across the assembled emissaries. He saw the fire in Vorlag's eyes change from anger to a grim warrior's resolve. He saw the Vespidian's anxiety morph into a frantic calculation of resources and logistics. He saw the Lumina's light coalesce into a focused, analytical beam. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in the center of them all. But it was being joined by something else. Unity, the kind of unity that can only be forged in the face of absolute extinction. "The Galactic Concordance accepts the Terran Confederacy as a full member," Kalen announced, his voice ringing with a finality that echoed through the silent chamber. "And our first act as a unified body will be to declare a state of total mobilization, not for war against a species, but for a war against oblivion itself. We will merge our fleets, our sciences, our philosophies. We will combine the Concordance's vast knowledge of this galaxy with humanity's mastery of baseline reality. We will find the surviving Ethel and learn from them. We will turn this entire galaxy into a fortress of complexity, a symphony of life so loud and discordant that the static will choke on it." It was a declaration of impossible hope against impossible odds, a final, defiant roar against the coming silence. On the bridge of the Vigilance Asterisk, now docked alongside the Asterisk Stone's memory at the edge of the former Ethel Dominion, Ambassador Rostova watched the star map. The data from the long-range sensors was being analyzed, the terrifying creep of the static at the galactic rim now marked by a growing field of red. It was slow, patient, inexorable. The new alliance, this grand, desperate concordance, had time, but not much. A human science officer approached her, his face grim. "Ambassador, we finished the primary analysis of the uncorrupted Ethel data core. We understand the nature of the static now, and we were wrong about something." "Wrong? How?" Rostova asked, her heart sinking. "We assumed the static was a natural phenomenon, a cosmic force like a black hole or a nebula. It is not," the officer said, his voice barely a whisper. "The Ethel data shows evidence of design. The way it seeks and erases information is not random. It is methodical, purposeful. It avoids certain quantum signatures and is drawn to others. This is not a force of nature." He brought up a final piece of data on the main screen. It was a fragment, ancient and deeply corrupted, that the Ethel themselves had never been able to fully decipher. But within the absolute stability of the Vigilance's asterisk systems, the human analysts had been able to restore it. It was a spectrographic signature, a faint, repeating signal embedded within the static's advancing front. A message broadcast from the heart of the approaching void. It was impossibly old, a ghost of a voice from a long-dead universe. The translation was a simple, chilling phrase repeated over and over. "Do not mourn. We are only making room. The builders are coming." Rostova stared at the words, the scope of their struggle expanding to a scale she could not have imagined. They were not fighting a force of nature. They were not fighting a mindless predator. They were fighting the groundskeepers. They were the weeds in a garden being cleared for a new planting. The warship that had humbled gods now seemed terrifyingly small. The united might of the galaxy felt like a single, defiant fist raised against a tsunami. But it was raised nonetheless. The age of gods was over. The age of mortals had begun. And their first, and perhaps last, great act would be to stand together and scream their existence into a universe that was trying to forget them. The fight for survival had just become a fight for the right to be remembered.